The floor is yours, Kelly.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. First, I'd like to acknowledge that we are seated on unceded Algonquin territory today, and I'd like to thank everyone for having us all here to share our stories. So my name is Kelly Duquette. I'm from Atikokan in northwestern Ontario. I am the Region 1 Youth Rep in Region 1 for the Region 1 Youth Rep for the Métis Nation of Ontario Youth Council, Treaty 3 half-breed adhesion area. So I grew up in a small, isolated town where, unfortunately for me, there wasn't very much Indigenous education or art programming. Growing up, I always knew of my Scottish and French ancestry, which I celebrated a lot, actually, and it was only until I was about 12 that I discovered my Métis ancestry, which began my journey towards reclaiming my cultural identity. It was a really confusing time for me. I wondered why my ancestors had kept our heritage a secret for so long and why it was so crucial for the survival of our identity and our people. These questions became the motivating forces behind my involvement in the Métis community, and they also influenced my field of studies. In 2014, I was elected as the Region 1 Youth Representative on the Métis Nation of Ontario Youth Council. Combined with my Aboriginal Studies minor, I began to find my place within my identity, or within my community, and I began to understand where my story fit into the larger narrative. I have used art as a platform, a way of teaching others about my culture and my experiences as a new generation Métis. As Louis Riel once said, "My people will sleep for 100 years, and when they awake, it will be the artists who give them their spirits back." To me, our generation is paving the way. We are the teachers because the transfer of Indigenous knowledge came to a halt for many of our families over a century ago. Our generation does not need to be afraid to celebrate who we are. We can be proud to tell our stories. As a published artist, I have taken his quote seriously. In 2012, my painting titled Disconnected, which speaks of the impacts of colonization on the transfer of Indigenous knowledge, was included in David Bouchard's book, Dreamcatcher and the Seven Deceivers. In 2013, Robbed of Their Culture, a black and white film photograph that I made, describes the effects of residential schools on our people and the process of assimilation and the origins of stereotypes, was published in the Northwest Territory Residential School System in Canada Teacher's Guide. This semester, I found my voice through a new style of painting. The process has become one of the most important elements of my work, reflecting on my identity and the struggles that I and many other Indigenous youth face. But people only get to see the finished product of my work most of the time. They never get to see the process. So for one of my works, I decided to document my process through a video as a way of highlighting the importance of my artistic process, a part of my work that very few people see. The film is my attempt to give the process equal significance to my finished paintings. Each scene in the film shows a step of my process, and each process reflects on a certain aspect of our history within Canada. The mixing of pigments in the beginning of the film reflects the ethnogenesis and emergence of Métis people. The blurred focus represents our people losing touch of and rejecting our culture. The peeling of liquid frisket represents the stripping of Métis culture that took place in residential and day schools, which aimed to kill the Indian in the child. The white paint covering the mixed colors below references the assimilation process, which halted the transfer of Indigenous knowledge and pushed us to blend into the dominant culture. The beating in the end of the film represents the reclaiming of our culture after many years of silence and oppression of our people. The words that I speak at the end of the film are in Michif French, one dialect of the Métis people's traditional language. I went to a group of knowledge keepers in my community to learn this. I learned the phrase, "Tu prends ma culture, and prends ma voyou, and prends qui tu," which means we are reclaiming our culture, reclaiming our voice, reclaiming our identity. The words are played over a scene of me beating, further reinforcing the strength and resilience of our people. This film played beside my painting series, I Forgot Who I Was, But Now I Remember, at my graduation exhibit in April. Although I faced many barriers upon high school graduation, I worked hard to reach my goals. Inspired by the determination of my ancestors, I went from barely getting accepted into university for fine arts because of no previous artistic training to receiving the top painter award of my year. As a Métis person, I have listened to both sides the Indigenous and non-Indigenous perspectives, representing a bridge between both nations. I'm determined to remain an advocate of the Indigenous voice and represent Indigenous peoples in the fight for legal recognition of their rights. I will be entering the first year of the Juris Doctor Common Law program at the University of Ottawa in the fall, but it is my plan to continue producing artwork as I pursue my legal education. Miigwech.
Have time for questions. Any questions coming from senators? I would ask you a question. I'm not. You said that you were 12 years old when you were discovered that your family had a Métis identity, and how were you able to track down your Métis ancestors?
So I was looking through a photo album one day, and I came across this old picture of my grandmother with her grandmother. And her grandmother was very clearly Indigenous to me, and I asked my gran, well, did you not know that your grandmother was Indigenous? And she said, well, I never knew because she just said, I'm Scottish, and that was the end of it, right? So a lot of our families kind of rejected our culture in order to avoid discrimination, and it was just a tool of survival, I guess. And when we found out, it was through a hunch that we kind of felt. So my grandmother tracked her records to Red River, and that's how we found out. But a lot of people are just finding out in their 50s or their 30s, and it's a long time lost. So, yeah.
And what was the Scottish surname? Sorry, I did two questions.
Well, I have on both sides of my family, Davidsons and Mackay.
Okay. Thank you. Senator Patterson, did you have a question?
So, Kelly, I understand you're an artist and you're going into law. Have you thought about how you'd use your law degree and maybe considered the implications of the recent Supreme Court decision on the Métis? Where are you heading in that direction?
Of course. It's kind of my dream. After watching a lot of the lawyers in my own community do great things for our nation, I feel like it's kind of a responsibility of mine now to help my community and other Indigenous communities fight for their rights. You know, the things that, I mean, even harvesting. Harvesting is a big one. I'm not able to get my harvester's card because my family is from Manitoba and I live in Ontario and I have an Ontario citizenship. So just things like this, I find that it's really important for our people to have a voice, and if I can get the tools to bring our people forward and be listened to and acknowledged, I think that's something I'd really be interested in doing.
Thank you.
So my name's Caitlyn. I come from Penetanguishene, which is what I thought was a small town, a couple hours north of Toronto. But I'm hearing people coming from places with 80 people living there, so I guess it was kind of almost a city. So I should start off saying good morning, Senators, my fellow Indigenous youth leaders, and everyone else that's here today to help make this happen. Thank you so much. This is an excellent opportunity. So I guess I'll start with a little bit about myself. My entrance into the political representation started with my role as the local youth rep on the Georgian Bay Métis Council, which is my historic Métis homeland, a beautiful place on Georgian Bay. From there, I joined the Métis Nation of Ontario's Youth Council, and I represented the Region 7 youth from my area. And today I am on the PCMNO. I'm the post-secondary rep. So I'm representing all of the post-secondary students from my community. I've also had the amazing opportunity of working as a cultural interpreter with the Métis Nation of Ontario's Summer Youth Cultural Program. And that's where I really started to learn a lot about my culture and my heritage and enact in that physically. So I learned Métis jigging, I learned beadwork, embroidery, finger weaving, and I learned a lot about the history and traditions of my people. I think you'll probably notice a theme in today's speakers. A lot of us didn't have the opportunity to learn about our cultures from birth, and some of us learned about it quite late. Myself, I learned about my culture when I was 16 after taking an Ojibwe course in my high school, and my dad mentioned, oh, well, you know, we have Ojibwe in our history. And so from there, I looked into it, and I discovered this whole aspect of my who I am, this whole aspect of my identity that I had never found before. And I thank Creator every day that I did find it, because it's become a big part of who I am. But I know that not everyone had that same opportunity. I've heard a lot of stories from fellow citizens that only discovered their Aboriginal identity in their late 50s, sometimes even 60s. I was lucky because I was able to find an extended Métis family to learn about my culture and my history, because this wasn't something that was readily known in my family. And I took this knowledge with me to university. I was involved in a program called the Infinite Reach Métis Student Solidarity Network. So I was able to teach other Métis youth who might not have had the opportunity about my culture, about their culture, our culture, and share with them the different traditional crafts that I had learned. So my focus on the future is definitely, in my capacity as the post-secondary rep on PC-MNO, is increasing and diversifying the education funding opportunities for Métis youth. And like my fellow Indigenous youth I've spoke of today, creating more mental health support and wellness programs for students, especially during the transition phase. Many of our students have to move away from their home communities, and it's a bit of a culture shock, and so it's important to have supports for their transition to university. I also hope to work with the PC-MNO's Women's Secretariat to encourage more programming for youth, such as culturally focused healthy masculinity program for boys and young men. Much of these ideas are fueled by my undergrad, which is a combined honor psychology and women and gender studies. Mental wellness is an important issue for me, as I have seen firsthand the effects of mental illness in my hometown. This past year, I volunteered at the local shelter and the local mental health hospital. And many of the people I worked with were Métis or First Nations. My conversations with them revealed to me the gaps in the social services that exist for society at large, and particularly with Aboriginal people. So this is why I've chosen to pursue my master's in social work, because I hope to represent and advocate for neuroatypical individuals in my community and emphasize the need for further supports, especially with transitioning from institutions to community. Connection to culture grounds people and helps them in many areas of their life, whether that be their mental and physical well-being, or their education and career goals, or other aspects of their life. I was given the opportunity to teach traditional Métis jigging to a group of dynamic Aboriginal students at an after-school program, and also speak on behalf of the MNO at various schools. We need to ensure that there are more opportunities for Aboriginal youth to connect with their culture in order to ensure they feel a part of something greater. I think one of the greatest dangers for our youth is a feeling of isolation, whether that be from their families, friends, or communities. By learning about their history and engaging with their peers, we can help to foster a sense of pride and help ensure well-being among our Aboriginal youth. My ancestors worked as translators, helping different groups gain understanding of one another. The responsibility has been passed on to me today, and I will always work towards helping others understand my culture and my heritage, whether that be non-Aboriginal people or those who are just discovering who they are. Like a bridge, I will also help others transition from one place to another. Students move to a new school, or individuals moving from an institution back into their community. My history and culture has taught me how to act as a guide for others, and this is a role I'm proud to continue. Thank you. Miigwech.
Thank you. Do I have time for a question? I think we have time for a question. Senator Patterson.
You said something about a study you'd done relating to mental health and neural.
I use the term neuroatypical. So basically, it's the idea that we're not different. People who suffer, I myself suffer from anxiety. So we're not different or divergent from the rest of society. It's that we have a different neurological makeup. Does that explain?
And the masculinity, wellness, healthy masculinity, can you just say a bit about that?
Yeah, I was first introduced to this. I go to school in Waterloo, and Kitchener has an amazing program called Massive, where they go into elementary schools and they offer programming for young boys on healthy masculinities. Which I think there's a huge gap for that. There's a lot of programming for young girls and identity and self-esteem and issues such as that, but you don't see that much for young boys. And if we want to change, we speak of the missing and murdered Indigenous women. We speak of the issues of violence against women. This is a conversation that shouldn't be placed on the shoulders of just women. This should be a conversation between all of us, because it affects all of us. And so if we have more programs with role models, especially culturally specific role models, I see some amazing role models in front of me today that could be instrumental in a young boy's life. I think that would be a really impactful way to make change.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. Senator Rain, one question.
Yeah, I just wanted to know if you and also Kelly knew that the Senate had studied the question of Métis identity, and our study came out about 3 years ago now, and it would probably be well worth you reading. We concluded in the end that Métis identification comes from themselves. It can't be prescribed. Mm-hmm. It's who you are, who you discover that you are. So it's kind of nice to see that both of you have found who you are and are finding your voice. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I prepared some notes. Usually I don't do that, but because there's a time limit, I made notes, because otherwise I could talk for a lot longer. Good morning, Senators. I want to thank you for the opportunity to be here. I want to acknowledge the traditional territory of the Algonquin Nation and acknowledge the fellow Indigenous young people that are here telling some amazing stories that I'm so very inspired by. My name is Mitch Case, and I come from Sault Ste. Marie, a Métis community at the heart of the Great Lakes in Ontario, which is the eastern doorway of the Métis Nation. I come from a place that, quite frankly, too many people don't even acknowledge it as being part of the Métis homeland. My community, while it's often overlooked and forgotten, has played an important role, many important roles, in the history of my people, the Métis Nation. It's one of the oldest Métis communities in the homeland. It's a hub of activity during the fur trade and the War of 1812, a war in which our community took up arms to defend itself, and it's a war that Britain couldn't have won without our assistance. In 1816, our community rallied once more to send a small band of warriors to Red River to support Cuthbert Grant at the Victoire de la Grenouille, or better known as the Battle of Seven Oaks, the 200th anniversary of which just passed a few days ago. In 1849, another member of our community, Guillaume Serre, found himself on trial in the Red River for violating the Hudson's Bay Company monopoly, and Louis Riel Sr. rallied the community around him. They won his case. They were victorious. In 1850, a year later, our community, under the leadership of our chiefs, Eustache Lesage and Charles Boyer, along with the First Nations communities under the leadership of Chief Xinhua Kons and Nimnagoching, they took on the mining companies and the government, who were illegally stealing our resources from a place called Mica Bay, maybe 2 hours north of where I live in Sault Ste. Marie. As a result of this action, the Robinson-Huron and Superior treaties were concluded, much to our dismay, and against the protests of the First Nations leadership. Our community was left out of the treaty. promises were made to protect our river lots. Promises were made to return a year later and sign another treaty with us. That's 160-some years later. We're still waiting, and we're ready whenever you are. These promises to protect our land, they seem to mean nothing. Within 10 years, 90% of our village in what is now downtown Sault Ste. Marie had been forcibly taken from us through a variety of different means. Our community was dispersed into smaller communities, north and east of Sault Ste. Marie, west to Red River, and roughly about 100 years later, after the loss of our village there at Sault Ste. Marie, the same thing happened again when Ontario decided to create Lake Superior Provincial Park. They relocated one of our communities out of Agua Bay and burned their houses down. And that's within living memory of the elders in my community. They still remember when that happened. There's an elder that I work with lots, and she talks about, I remember the day that float plane landed and told us we were to leave. These are living memories, right? In the 1960s, my community started working with others in Ontario to assert our rights as a people. We did this through the Ontario Métis Non-Status Indians Association. In the 1980s, we joined the Ontario Métis Aboriginal Association. In the 90s, we had come to a point where we were no longer interested in being an advocacy group. We were prepared to stand on our own as a government, and we, with other communities, formed the Métis Nation of Ontario. In my lifetime, my community was called to fight once again for our rights and for our place in the world. Throughout my childhood, two men from my community were on trial. Our community was on trial, and in fact, our entire nation was on trial. I refer to the Powley case, where two men from the community were charged for illegally hunting. Steve and Roddy Powley, and they asserted that they had a right as not only did we prevail, but the truth of history prevailed. By the end, 14 judges at 4 levels of court had agreed with us that we were a nation, an Indigenous nation in North America, and that we had rights that had to be respected. I share these stories with you not as a history lesson of the Métis community in Sault Ste. Marie, but as a lesson of what makes me who I am, and what gives me the strength and the courage and the determination to do the work that I do. My political activities began at a pretty young age. I started organizing. We organized the first Aboriginal Student Association at my high school, and we successfully lobbied the school board to create an Aboriginal Studies program in the high school. And that program is still running today. I still volunteer with that program when I'm able to at home. I started volunteering with the Métis Nation of Ontario as a youth rep on the Sault Ste. Marie Métis Council when I turned 16, and 2 years later I started as a regional youth rep for Region 4, which is sort of Sault Ste. Marie in the North Shore, Lake Huron. 4 years ago I was elected president of the Métis Nation of Ontario Youth Council, and 2 months ago I was re-elected to my second and final term. Ontario Premier Kathleen Wynne appointed me to 2 terms on the Premier's Council for Youth Opportunities, where I helped with an amazing group of young people to advise 18 different ministries in Ontario around issues affecting young people. I'm a first-degree Medewan of the Three Fires Medewan Lodge, and I'm a graduate of Xinhua Kinnomagagimek and Algoma University, where I studied history and Anishinaabe studies. In 2014, I was awarded the Ontario Medal for Young Volunteers, and in 2015, the Charlie Hunter Scholarship. My day job, I'm the Anishinaabe Studies Program Coordinator at Xinhua Kinnomagagimek, and I'm currently working with the elders in my community to compile an edited collection of stories from our community, as well as working with Kelly on a children's book to tell a lot of these stories. I've been referred to, I guess, by some people in my community as a leader. I'm very cautious about accepting that title. I hesitate. I'm more comfortable saying I'm a politician because there's a lot less meaning in that. And so, but if this is true, if for a second I allow myself to accept that premise, then it's because of the stories that I spoke about a few moments ago. My entire worldview has been shaped by those stories because they've lived on in my community in different forms and in different places, but they have survived in one way or another. My entire outlook has been shaped by the lessons that are in those stories. And I've had the opportunity to hear those stories, and I have relentlessly pursued them, seeking to know as much as I can about those stories. Because those stories have given me a foundation from which to work. My story, or my community carried those stories on, and today I do what I can to carry them on. In my spare time, I do a lot of beadwork. I try and continue the Métis floral beadwork tradition. This vest I'm wearing right now is made of sort of like classic Hudson's Bay Company material, right? The Hudson's Bay Company, who used my people to create their empire, who then worked against my people in Sault Ste. Marie and across our homeland when we were asserting our rights. You know, if you look here at this big flower, right, it's surrounded by black beads, which sort of, to me, when I was putting this together, represented that sort of that darkness that surrounded our community. But in the center, we survived, right? Like, we just kept going right there. Like, you know, we had to do what we had to do, but we survived at the center. And out from there, there's a lot of there's new life, and there's new buds, and there's new energy coming out of there. But there's a lot of room up here. There's still room, right, for more, for more victories, and for more reemergence that I hope to see in my time. The Hudson's Bay Company a few years ago was bought out by an American investment company, and my community is still here, and we're thriving. So, you know, make of that what you will. One of the questions that we were asked to consider, just as I conclude, we were asked to consider what our future plans are. This is probably a pretty difficult question for me. It was actually the most difficult question because I'm not very good at making personal, like beyond dinner, I'd have a hard time with personal plans, right? But my community has been really busy making plans. They've been organizing and planning for generations now. And that work continues today, and they're organizing and like we're organizing, and we're preparing, and we're seeking justice for our community. And so I just want to be a part of that movement. So I guess those are my plans. So with that, I say merci, miigwech, and thank you for your time.